Welcome to Flipped Classroom. Today's lesson is on the Rogerian argument used for a claim of policy. The Rogerian structure is based on ideas by psychologist Carl Rogers. What makes it different from the other essay structures we've used is it has a delayed thesis. You'd use a Rogerian structure when you have a resistant audience, an audience that doesn't agree with you from the start. Carl Rogers was a big believer in emphatic listening, being able to walk in someone else's shoes. So in a Rogerian argument, you are trying to find common ground, trying to understand what the other side believes, and trying to identify where two opposing parties can find agreement. For example, universal ideas such as safety or fairness. In a Rogerian structure, you'd begin by giving a brief objective statement about the issue. Then you would give the opposing point of view. You'd present it with impartial language and show understanding for what the other side believes. At that point, you could present your own point of view, but be very careful that you don't want to insult the opposition. After you've presented both sides, then you want to find common ground. Where do they both agree? At this point, you'd write your thesis statement. So your thesis may be halfway through your essay or even close to the end. Then you would provide evidence to support your thesis statement. Here's a sample structure. In a traditional argument essay, as in most essays you've learned to write, the thesis statement goes at the end of the introduction paragraph. Then present your reasons. Reasons 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 to support your argument. Then you'd have what the opposition says and a rebuttal explaining why the opposition is incorrect, followed by a conclusion. A Rogerian's a little bit different. You would have an introduction paragraph, but you would not place your thesis statement in the introduction paragraph. I know this goes against everything you've been taught in writing. That's why we save the Rogerian structure for sophomore college composition. After the introduction, you present the opposition's point of view. Then you present common ground. Then you would put your common ground, followed by your thesis, which would come about halfway or near the end of your essay, followed by your reasons 1, 2, 3, as many as you need, and your conclusion paragraph. One of the distinguishing factors for a Rogerian structure is the common ground. That is an issue that the two opposing parties can agree on. So when we're writing about the death penalty, both sides would have distinct opinions, but they both would agree on safety and fairness. So a common ground statement would say, giving murderers life sentences without parole will keep the streets safe without needing the death penalty. In this case, both sides have made a compromise. Also, fairness. Favoritism or arbitrary discrimination is frowned upon. So a statement would be, everybody deserves a trial free of prejudice. So retrials are necessary when Black defendants have biased all-white juries or inadequate representation. So in both situations, I found common ground. It is a compromise. In essay number 4, you will be writing a claim of policy essay, the same as you did in essay number 3. You can select any topic that is addressed in the book, Just Mercy, A Story of Justice and Redemption. You need to write your essay in a Rogerian structure, so that's different than essay number 3. You are required to use a minimum of 6 resources. 1 is Just Mercy, A Story of Justice and Redemption. You do need to use the textbook. You can use a maximum of 2 college-level websites. You can use 0, that's fine. There's nothing wrong with Google, but in this case, I want you to use a higher-level source, something more challenging that you will use throughout college and grad school. So you are going to rely on database articles and books for this research paper. Let's review one more time what a claim of policy is. It's where you argue that certain conditions should exist. It's where you advocate for an adoption of policies or action because a problem needs to be resolved. And you begin by persuading the audience that a problem actually exists. Keep in mind, in a Rogerian argument, your audience does not think there is a problem. Your audience would not think there's a problem having the death penalty for children. They wouldn't see a problem with all-white juries. They wouldn't see any issues with having inadequate legal representation, and they'd see no need for retrials if new evidence was available. So you would need to begin by persuading your audience that this problem actually exists. Let's take a look at a sample structure for essay number 4. Once again, you'd begin with your introduction paragraph. You'd have a hook, your catchy opening, and some background on the issue. Remember, this is not the point in your essay where you would have your research. Rely on common knowledge. Your essay would begin with the opposition's point of view. They do not believe there is a problem. You'd explain their position on the issue and have research-based evidence, experts that support the opinions of the opposition. Then you would go to the proponent side. That is the side you agree with. They would believe there is a problem. This is where you explain that a problem exists. You'd persuade your audience, your readers, that there is a problem. And you'd once again use research-based evidence to explain the problem. At this point in your essay, you'd be pointing out common ground. You'd be finding a compromise. You'd be looking for areas of agreement on the issue. And then you place your thesis statement. Next, you follow up with your evidence. Why is this policy beneficial to all sides? But it is a compromise, and you'd once again have research-based evidence in support of this policy. You'd end with your conclusion paragraph that restates your thesis, explaining why this issue matters to everyone, your universal truth, your global insight, and your call to action. End by telling your audience what steps they should do to make sure this policy is enacted. Let's pretend the research question is, should children under the age of 18 who are murderers receive the death penalty? You'd start with your introduction explaining that children who are not even old enough to drive, drink, or vote are old enough to die in some states because of the death penalty. You'd also reference your book, Just Mercy, at this point with some of the stories that Bryan Stevenson brings up. Your next section of the paper would be those who believe that no matter what your age is, if you commit murder, you deserve the death penalty. Their evidence for this is that victims deserve justice, and you really can't change children. They are too damaged once they have become predator murderers, and you'd have experts that would support this point of view. You'd move on to the next section, your point of view that the kids should not receive the death penalty. You'd point out they're too immature, their brains aren't developed, children deserve a second chance, there's rehabilitation programs, and once again, you'd have experts supporting this point of view. Next, you'd move on to the common ground. Where do both sides agree? Well, both sides agree that victims do deserve justice, and also communities need to be safe from predators. After you've pointed out the common ground, set forth your thesis statement. That is the policy. For example, juveniles who commit violent crimes should serve prison sentences with rehabilitation and not be released until courts certify the criminal is no longer a threat to society. You would then, the rest of your essay, you would develop that policy with evidence showing that the death penalty is counterproductive, it harms the families of the victims as well as the families of the child put to death. You'd use evidence from the examples in Just Mercy, those stories. You'd use research-based evidence in support of the policy that rehabilitation and prison sentences are the correct path for juvenile murderers. You'd end your conclusion paragraph by restating your thesis and really pointing out the universal truth that everybody really does care about kids and the victims do deserve justice. There has to be consequences for actions. For your call to action, you could end by arguing that your audience should protest or vote to have laws changed or get educated about these issues. Take steps to enact the new policy that children under the age of 18 that have committed murders should not receive the death penalty. So in review, these are the 5 main characteristics of claim of policy. You may want to pause the presentation right now to review those. And here's a review of a Rogerian argument. You may want to pause your video and take a look at those as well. So in conclusion, find more information on this assignment. Go back to Canvas and look at the next lecture notes. In the directions, I'll have suggestions for topics and other ideas to get you going. Also, if you're looking for topic suggestions, go back to the class discussions. What ideas were presented in there? There are flipped classroom videos on how to create your works cited pages and how to use databases, as well as what is a claim of policy and other very helpful videos. Best of luck on essay number 4, and thank you for joining me today in Flipped Classroom.